So, the book that shut me down completely. I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but reading this book really did cause me to quit reading for quite some time. And the only books I could pick up and read were old favorites that I knew I could count on to bring me a certain level of comfort, a certain level of enjoyment. No surprises, because this book had way too many disappointing, unpleasant surprises for my liking, by far. Yeah. Okay, so again, I don't want to seem overly dramatic, but this was a big deal for me. I can't remember ever having read a book that did this to me. And I did actually film a video right after I finished the book. I wrote out all my points that I wanted to make about why I didn't like the book, why I thought the book was not well written on some levels, and mostly why I felt like the book was both falsely advertised and not a good message to put out there. However, when I finished that video after filming it and editing it and having it ready to go up, I just had such a bad taste in my mouth from having read it and from having had to talk about it for so long on the video. I just couldn't do it. I just wanted to, wash my hands of it, be done with it, and never think about it or talk about it ever again. So yeah, I deleted the video before I ever posted it. And I'm not sorry about that. I don't regret that. 6 months later, I have not changed my opinion about the book. I do know a lot of people like this book, and is considered by some to be an extremely stunning piece. I believe stunning is an actual quote of writing by a debut author. It could be classified as literary historical fiction. I was excited to read it because I love historical fiction, and I most especially love California historical fiction. So what is this book that did this to me? It's called How Much of These Hills is Gold by Pam Zhang. It was published in 2020, and it actually was longlisted for the Booker Prize and was a finalist in the Lambda Literary Awards for bisexual fiction. I did know going into it that some people really hadn't liked it, but for some reason that didn't make much of an impression on me. I don't generally pay much attention to reviews. I like to form my own opinion, and it didn't take me long into this book to form some very strong opinions, but I held out. I don't like to DNF unless absolutely necessary, and I really wanted this book to work for me, and so I just held out and kept reading and held out and kept reading, and it never worked. In fact, the ending was one of the worst parts of the book for me. It actually ended mid-sentence. That might seem, very cool. I don't know. Maybe it's a new thing authors are doing, but I don't like a book to end in mid-sentence. Do you? More importantly, I don't like books that end with characters who are doing things I don't really think those characters would have done, and also things that don't really make sense for that context and that time period. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In this video, I am not going to go into great depth as I did in that first video I filmed. I'm just going to hit a few points that will explain to you why, for me, this book shut me down. So first of all, the reason I had such high expectations for this book is because I'm currently writing a series of books set in Northern California during the gold rush period of the mid-19th centuries, which is exactly when this book was set. Secondly, the synopsis that I had read for the book sounded like it was actually going to focus on the problems facing Chinese immigrants who were working in the gold rush mines at that time and on the railroads at that time. And since I'm definitely going to be including Chinese people in my books, I thought this would be an interesting take. Yeah. So let's get into it. A couple of things that were included in the book were Chinese symbolism and a reimagined history of the gold rush in California. Now, I love Chinese symbolism. I actually lived in China for 5 years and worked as a teacher there. I made many friends there. I loved the country. I loved the people. I loved the culture. I loved the history and the symbolism. However, the way it was used in this book, I was not a fan of because it was intertwined with reimagined California history, and I didn't like the way that history was reimagined. Maybe because I know it so well, it really struck the wrong chords. But to me, those two elements did not work in this book at all. Now again, this writer, Pam Zhang, is said to be a wonderful new literary fiction voice. And she did have some beautiful, memorable language in this book. And when I would come across a section like that, I was like, yes, okay, I can see a light somewhere way down there at the end of the tunnel. Maybe we're going to go in a different direction and we're going to get more of this, but we didn't. There was a lot of unusual writing, word choices, and again, more symbolism. Some of it obvious, some of it just confusing. And there were very unexpected plot twists, very abrupt, sudden plot twists, where you would suddenly be in a completely different place. You weren't sure of the time, as in how much had passed. It wasn't always clear. You weren't even sure whose point of view you were in. Some of it was dreams, and you weren't always sure what was real and what was dreams, let alone if the imagery presented, the symbolism presented was supposed to be actually real to the characters. Maybe it was just all open to interpretation by the reader. I'm not sure. And actually, while reading it, I didn't care. Not a good sign, usually. One thing I definitely want to mention is no one should read this book if they have any problem with human gore, because I was not expecting to see that in this book. I had never seen any mention of that in any of the synopses or reviews I had read. And yet this book is full of highly gross human gore. Not like a thriller slasher kind of way, just, I don't really know how to describe it, but let's just say you don't want to be eating anything before you read this or while you're reading this. And I basically had to skim over those passages, and there were quite a few of them. Okay, but the two main reasons why this book affected me the way it did were the way it dealt with gender identity and the immigration experience, both of which were the two main reasons I thought I was going to love this book. As far as the immigration experience goes, there's so much you could do with the reality of what happened in California during the gold rush with the Chinese, as well as the many other immigrants who came at that time for various reasons. But that's not what was done here. And I don't want to take away from Pam Zhang's view and what she was trying to do and represent. But because I know the history of California during that time period so well, it just did not ring true for me. Now, I'm not saying that some of what she described isn't true, but I didn't feel it was at all representative. For that matter, the Chinese people she focused on, this family, the two kids who, by the way, in a lot of reviews, they come across as young orphan kids, and they're actually a bit older, but those two kids and their parents I don't feel represent the immigrant experience the way we would like to see it represented for the most part. The parents were both deeply, deeply flawed, violent, deceitful. And while the reviews I read before I read the book often talked about family memories being a bonding experience for the family, there is also the truth that family memories can be just the opposite, and they can tear families apart. And the violence, the lying, and the revealed secrets, and the way that the author took the family and all the individuals in it really didn't portray the Chinese immigrant in a positive light at all, in my opinion. I mean, are there flawed people in every race, every culture, every religion? Yes, of course. But when you make every character that you're dealing with be negative like that, it leaves a really bad taste. For me, it did anyway. Now, as far as the gender identity issue goes, I don't want to give too much away. If someone out there really wants to read this book, more power to you if you do. But one of the children is presented as at least gender curious, probably trans. I don't want to give away more than that. But being the parent of several queer adult children, including one trans non-binary child, I was expecting something different. And in fact, as the book went on, I felt personally that this book sent the wrong message when it comes to gender roles and trans people. I feel like if someone was reading this book who was not already familiar with trans people in their own real life, and they were learning about gender identities and trans people from this book, they would leave it confused. And maybe even if they were slightly biased against queer people, especially trans, this might reinforce their view. Now, I don't know how that's possible because I'm sure Pam Zhang went into it with, the opposite purpose. But, and it was nominated for and became a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award for bisexual fiction. However, again, as a parent who has seen my children grow up and become adults and live the life of that trans and queer people are living in this country, I feel that it was presented as if the parents had forced this almost on the child, which is a common misconception today in our society about non-binary and trans young adults, that it somehow was at least encouraged, if not forced on them by culture or even their family. So, I didn't know if I should bring that up because not everybody's interested in it, and it might cause some people to be upset who don't want to read about stuff like that. Well, if you don't want to read about it, don't read this book. But of course I'm going to bring it up because that was one of the reasons I read the book, and I was, again, to be honest, disappointed with how it was presented. Now, could someone else read this book and come away with a very different impression of this concept as it was presented? Yes. But again, I am an avid reader. I read lots of books, lots of historical fiction, a fair amount of literary fiction, and this just did not do it for me. And since then, I have watched a few videos by some booktubers I really respect and found that they didn't care for this book either. So I don't feel like such a loner, but boy, I sure wasn't expecting it. And when I get to the end of the book and I'm thinking, well, maybe at least at the end, it can be redeemed. Although along the way, these characters did things I don't think they ever really would have done based on, how they were shown and developed in the beginning of the book. Maybe at least at the end, we can have a little bit of closure and a little bit of positivity between the siblings at least. But no, in the end, the main character, again, I don't want to spoil things for those of you who might read it, but chooses to do things I really don't think she would have chosen, and things that actually were not even probably remotely possible at that time in this area of Northern California. So I left the book, again, mid-sentence, without any kind of closure and just a lot of bad feelings. So there you go. See Pam Zhang's How Much of These Hills is Gold, set in California during the gold rush in the 1850s. Not what I was expecting, not something I enjoyed at all. And it threw me for a loop. Really made me question whether I ever wanted to read a new author again. I am thankfully past that now, and in an upcoming video I'm going to share with you the series I discovered quite unexpectedly that brought me back into reading, into the joy of finding new authors. And yeah, that's for another day, but that's what happened to me. Tell me in the comments, have you ever read a book that Not only did you not like, not only did it disappoint you, completely not what you thought it was going to be, but it really kind of turned you off to reading for a while. And if so, what was it? And what was the book that brought you back to the joy of reading? Let me know. I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, happy reading.